As we prepare to enter the 21st century, we hear increasing talk and concern about American education. Will we be able to compete with the rest of the world? What should we be teaching? Can we retrain our existing workforce? What part does a liberal arts education play in all of this discussion, and what importance does it have in a society increasingly driven by technology? Dr. Jerry Hudson, president of Willamette University, joins us today to explore what constitutes a liberal arts education and the value it brings to our constantly changing world. Dr. Hudson came to Willamette University as president in 1980. Previously, he was president of Hamline University in Minnesota and provost of Pepperdine University in Malibu. He received his doctorate in American history from Tulane University and recently has taught a course on ethics and the American tradition. He has served as a director of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, and he is also a member of the corporate board of directors of Portland General Corporation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jerry Hudson to the City Club.
Thank you. I think it was Horace Mann who said the surest way to scatter a mob in Massachusetts was to commence a speech on education. I know that this is not Massachusetts, and you're certainly not a mob, and I hope you won't scatter as I begin to commence a speech on education and the liberal arts tradition. To talk about liberal arts and the value of liberal arts education requires us, I suspect, to agree on what it is. Some merely define the liberal arts as a body of knowledge, study of disciplines, of the humanities and the arts and the sciences which inform us about nature and society and individuals. Others talk about the liberal arts as a term of mode of inquiry, the development of lifelong learning skills, skills such as the ability to read and to write effectively, the ability to see connections among areas of learning, and the capacity for moral reasoning. But all of us share the sense that the liberal arts are in some way freeing, liberating the mind, freeing us from our narrow prejudices as we learn more about being bound together and by the bonds of a common culture. I've often welcomed freshmen to Willamette's campus by saying they'll have the opportunity, while in college there, to experience what Alfred North Whitehead called the habitual vision of greatness, without which there can be no progress, without which there can be no authentic liberation. Students will be introduced to great characters, to great ideas, to great art, to great music. And this association with greatness cannot help but influence them. As they study history and political science, philosophy, literature, and the other subjects, they'll have the opportunity to learn what it means to be human as they discover the common roots that they share with the rest of humankind. Of course, every generation must address the question of what constitutes greatness. What are the elements of our common culture? This is the kind of critical questioning that is indeed a tradition of liberal arts inquiry. Liberal arts education today must strive both to transmit the common culture in all of its complexities, as well as the skills of critical inquiry. Life is inherently interdisciplinary, requiring more from us than merely some specialized knowledge and skills. So as a result of that, the liberal arts institutions like Willamette aim to provide learning for a lifetime. This means that we seek to prepare our students for living meaningfully and productively in all facets of their lives, helping them especially if they to develop the desire as well as the talent to keep on learning as long as they live. Let me give you an example. In the College of Liberal Arts, Willamette has a freshman seminar course which is generically entitled World Views. It's taught by 23 faculty to groups of 18 students. And the course provides an interesting example to first-year undergraduates of this lifelong learning that is such an integral part of the liberal arts. because the course, now in its 6th year, is built around a central theme. This theme changes every 3 or 4 years. It's a common reading list comprised of primary text. In its first 4 years, the theme of the worldviews was Victorian England. Currently, the theme is 20th century Latin America. My point here, though, is that literally none of the faculty teaching worldviews has either of these two areas as their primary area of specialization and expertise. They're strictly speaking amateurs in these fields, but they're wonderful models of people who have devoted themselves to the concept of lifelong learning. With some trepidation, a lot of hard work and preparation, mathematicians and political scientists have taken on the task of leading students in a discussion of Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. Likewise, chemists and art historians have found themselves explaining Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Mayan religion. Thus, students learn two important lessons about learning at the outset of their college careers. First, they encounter a group of faculty with the interest and capacity to grow intellectually in new areas. And second, they experience the college as a community with an intellectual life that goes beyond vocational disciplinary specialties and in which people with diverse backgrounds can address important topics in a common enterprise. Now, even though I suspect that there's a fair consensus on what a liberal education is and tries to accomplish, I want to undermine any notion you may have that liberal arts institutions are serene, ivory tower institutions where academics are protected from the controversies of the real world. Quite to the contrary, schools like Willamette and other liberal arts colleges are grappling regularly with important issues about what it means to be a liberal arts college and what it means to our society for the liberal arts colleges as they address the issues of the day. For example, liberal arts people are discussing and disagreeing about what and how we should be teaching in a diverse society and in a shrinking world. We're discussing and disagreeing about whether the values of community and harmony are greater than the value of free speech and conduct. We're discussing and disagreeing about the extent to which pre-professional training has a place in a liberal arts education. Liberal arts institutions have been seeking, especially in the last 50 years, to analyze, to define, to justify, to explain liberal education amid the turmoil of this rapidly changing society. And we have to address what should be the basis of liberal learning in the 21st century. Over the years, discussion has revolved around using, for example, the great books to liberally educate our students. I'm certain that many of you have Mortimer Adler's celebrated collection of great books on your shelves, books which are generally recognized as masterpieces of Western literature, science, and theology. But there are two very opposing views on the value of using such great books to educate students. The view in favor of using these books presumes that they embody the very best of Western civilization, what is good and what is evil, what is admirable and what's reprehensible, how we ought to think and to act. As a result, proponents of the great books argue that they should be studied as the repository of our culture's shared values. But increasingly, there's an opposing point of view that liberal learning via the great books is an education with blinders on, because the great books are the products of an elite group of privileged white males living within the confines of a European culture, and they've been chosen and canonized as great books by a similar group of people. So as a result, it's argued that the so-called great books, where the values represented are parochial, that they exclude the views and interests of all others, and they shouldn't therefore be the foundation of a liberal arts education. This is an issue that simply has to be addressed by colleges and by those who are part of liberal arts institutions. But this great books debate is merely one dimension of a larger discussion and debate in liberal arts circles about multiculturalism and inclusiveness. American colleges and universities are wrestling, as they always have, with the academic and social implications of a changing world. This time, the change creating the stir is in the demographics of university student bodies and in the worlds where these graduates will live and work. Our world continues to be increasingly multicultural, and our society, rightly so, has sought to be more sensitive to gender and racial issues. When I was writing my Ph.D. dissertation in the 1960s, 94% of college students were white. 63% were men. 9 out of 10 PhDs were awarded to men. And 80% of university faculty were men. Today, there's a much more balanced picture, and while gender and racial representation still need constant attention, certainly much progress has been made. Many of us are in the process of redefining and what diversity and what truth really mean in 1992. I was born in a small coal mining town of Whitwell in the hills of Tennessee. Our town was too small to have a traffic light. We did have one blinking yellow light, but you can tell how small it was. The definition of diversity in Whitwell, Tennessee was that there were 3 different Baptist churches. The definition of truth was that 2 of them were wrong. I had a sheltered upbringing where history was linear and factual. And frankly, it's only been in the last few years that I've fully understood that indeed perhaps Columbus didn't really discover America, or that manifest destiny didn't quite justify the westward expansion. The environment in which we live and work is increasingly multicultural. And working to become more sensitive to perspectives and people of other cultures and backgrounds is becoming increasingly important in business and society, and thus must be an important ingredient in the mix of university life today. But how should this be done? Should classes or departments be added to represent the history, heritage, and perspectives of a certain race, class, or gender? Should the core Western civilization curricula be changed or abolished in deference to multiculturalism? Is there a common culture that American colleges and universities should transmit? As I look at our curriculum and talk with our faculty, I'm struck by the diversity on the contemporary campus in terms of the answer to these questions. It seems to me that indeed there is a common culture, but that it's in a period of redefinition and refinement and expansion. For American society, the realities of a modern social mobility and the tremendous impact of modern communications makes the kind of cultural isolation that we knew 100 years ago virtually impossible today. So in terms of a common culture of the liberal arts colleges, perhaps there is less consensus than was true 30 years ago, but I see us moving towards some kind of synthesis as to what that culture is and how we transmit it. Perhaps Willamette's Worldviews course again provides an appropriate example, this time about how the issue of great books and multiculturalism are confronted in a practical situation of course design. Clearly, the version of the course which focused on Victorian England had more of a great books orientation than had the Latin American focus. It might seem that we simply decided to go with the canon in the first version and go with multiculturalism in the second version. But the reality is more complex. The faculty designing the Victorian course deliberately included the voices of those outside the white male-dominated society of 19th century England. They included not only the proto-feminist Mary Shelley, but also Tagore's The Home and the World, an Indian view of the impact of Victorian colonialism. But if this demonstrates how even a more traditionally focused syllabus can include multicultural, It's also the case that some of the works in the Latin American course, such as the poetry of the Chilean writer Pablo Neruda, are legitimate candidates for great book status. It's been an experience that through reasoned discussion and debate, we can indeed arrive at a syllabus that addresses both the concern of enduring excellence along with the concern for multicultural diversity. I believe this discussion of multiculturalism is healthy for two reasons. On the one hand is the simple practical interest in recognizing the reality of a multicultural world in which students will live and work. It's important, even ethical, for the students to learn to understand and to accommodate others with whom they'll live and do business. On the other hand is the interest of protecting unrestricted free speech, especially in a multicultural environment where conflicts and tensions are prevalent. An important thread of our American heritage is the notion that I may hate what you say, and I will hope that an educated population will ultimately reject what you say, but I will defend your right to say it. In part, the multiculturalism issue is simply about the addition of new and sometimes angry voices to this very significant liberal arts conversation in which we're engaged. Liberal arts colleges face many of the issues which our society faces, but perhaps in a more concentrated way. There's no doubt, particularly in a society as heterogeneous and diverse as ours, that one person's opinions and values may be another person's anathema. But where there is a balance in the liberal arts college between giving freedom to the individual and asserting authority to enforce community norms and values. To what extent, for example, should a student who has been encouraged to develop and become attached to convictions and principles be allowed to promote values that are offensive to others or in a way that is not open to give and take? Should language considered offensive or harassing to an ethnic or gender group be regulated? Should speech or conduct that offends notions of civility and community be suppressed and punished? Given that the search for truth is paramount at a university, should Willamette and similar institutions be more devoted to freedom than even the larger society might be, even if the price of that freedom is the occasional perpetuation of prejudice and insensitivity? Perhaps it will not surprise you that this issue has revealed itself in the hotly debated issue of sexual orientation at Willamette the last several years. As a forum for the exchange of ideas and perspectives, the university during the last year provided a platform for representatives both of the Oregon Citizens Alliance and of Queer Nation. Part of the function in providing such a forum is to allow the status quo to be challenged, to encourage people to examine their beliefs and values within an environment of critical inquiry. You can imagine, however, the protests that are lodged from varying perspectives about the appropriateness of having one or another group on campus. How can you possibly condone and endorse this group or that group? Allowing those people on campus runs counter and contrary to everything for which this university stands. How dare you use my tuition dollars to bring this kind of offensive message to campus? I've heard all three of those comments in the last year. And how do we reply? What is the appropriate reply? Outgoing president of Yale University, Benno Schmidt, provides, I think, a particularly articulate perspective on the importance of a university remaining a very open forum. Values of civility, mutual respect, and harmony are rightly prized within the university, he says. But these values must be fostered by teaching and by example, and they must be defended by expression. To seek to advance them by suppression is both futile and an inversion of the values that underlie the academic mission. If fear, ignorance, and bigotry exist on our campuses, then it's far better that they be exposed and answered than they be bottled up. When the goals of harmony collide with freedom of expression, Freedom must be the paramount obligation of the academic community. Universities cannot censor or suppress speech, no matter how obnoxious its content, without violating its justification for existence. Liberal education presupposes that a liberated mind will strive for the courage and composure to face ideas that are fraught with evil and to answer them. To stifle expression because it is obnoxious, erroneous, embarrassing, or somehow not correct is to elevate fear over the capacity for a liberated and humane mind. These are not easy issues for college administrators. I am greatly distressed when I hear expressions on my campus that are demeaning to racial minorities, to women, to gays and lesbians, or any group that are victimized by ugly stereotypes. We must respond to such remarks on campus that demean and denigrate, because racism and other such prejudices are antithetical to the academic mission of the university. And all should know where we stand. But the answer is not to suppress any speech thought to be bigoted. It is the function of free expression to dispel ignorance and fear with the light of truth. An additional issue of much discussion and debate among faculty and administrators is the appropriate place, if any, of pre-professional training in the liberal arts college. More and more I hear people questioning whether the liberal arts are worth the expense. And lest you think I am creating a straw man for the sake of argument, let me refer you to this week's Chronicle of Higher Education. On page 5 of this week's issue, there's a profile of the president of the Fashion Institute of Technology, who's retiring from the presidency there after 20 years of service. And in a final interview, he lambasts the liberal arts. He calls four-year liberal arts majors, quote, lost souls. Four-year colleges he calls poor imitations of educational institutions. And he calls vocational education the most successful producer of the movers and shakers of this world. I think he's very wrong. I wish he were here today so we could debate that issue. But in a nation seemingly obsessed with careerism and technology, many students or their parents believe they need a specialized degree from a technical or vocational school in order to have an instant entry into the job market. Suggestions are made that Willamette and similar institutions need to provide more pre-professional training. Yet liberal arts educators continue to believe strongly that the most valuable education is about much more than just acquiring those kinds of marketable skills and preparing for the years immediately following graduation. A truly liberating education cannot be dominated by an emphasis on material purpose, or it fails its students in the civilizing purpose of learning. Former Occidental College President Richard Gilman reflected the philosophy of schools like Willamette and other liberal arts colleges when he said, "The purpose of education in liberal arts colleges is not to learn how to make a living, but to learn how to make a life that is worth living." Liberal arts colleges are not opposed to including opportunities for career preparation as part of their curriculum, but certainly not as the predominant focus. The aim of the undergraduate experience is not limited to preparing students for productive careers, but it's also for enabling them to live lives of dignity and purpose. Contrary to conventional wisdom, I don't believe that liberal arts graduates are disadvantaged when they enter the marketplace. Many employers place a premium on the kind of interdisciplinary work, analytical skills, communication skills, which are among the outcomes of a liberal arts education. It was a 1981 study of student development by David Winter, David McClellan, Abigail Stewart that showed that liberal education is particularly suited for developing learning and leadership abilities. They compared a private liberal arts college, a public college with a range of general and career programs, and a community college emphasizing career curriculum. And the study revealed that liberal arts students made significantly greater gains in analytical and critical thinking, in independence of thought, in self-assurance and leadership abilities, and in maturity of judgment. And interestingly, even undergraduate professional programs are adding liberal arts elements to their curriculum. When the Massachusetts Institute of Technology began a liberal learning program in 1987, an MIT official attributed the change to the recognition that, quote, too many MIT graduates have ended up working for too many Princeton and Harvard graduates. The goal of a liberal arts institution like Willamette is to form a community united in the disciplined effort of nurturing the development of knowledge, skills, and values that will enable students to be as well as to do. The kind of graduates we seek to put into the world are those who've begun the process of thinking critically, communicating effectively, being appropriately skeptical, being imaginative, making intelligent commitments, and searching and probing into the various dimensions of human existence. I specifically said graduates who have begun the process because 4 years in a liberal arts college is just the beginning of one's liberal education, which indeed is a lifelong process of seeing the connectedness of things. Graduation from a liberal arts college is just the commencement of an ongoing conversation about what it means to be human. The message I want to leave with you today is that liberal education is not only indispensable and invaluable, but it's also a lifelong process. No one can store up enough education to last a lifetime, even in a very fine liberal arts institution. The best possible college can only give a student the disciplines and the habits that make it possible to continue one's education. Liberal education will not automatically make a person's life easier, but its value is that it will, or it should, help to enrich and expand a person's possibilities. Many of our choices in life are made in ignorance that dwarfs our knowledge, no matter how learned we are. But a good liberal arts education should make us aware of how much we don't know, and consequently make us modest and tolerant as well as lifelong learners. I like what one of my colleagues at Willamette tells the entering freshmen. He says, ignorance, that is simply not knowing, unlike stupidity, is curable. And liberal arts helps us to discover and begin to cure our ignorance and steer our lives more intelligently and humanely into better futures. These are valuable attributes that benefit not only the individual, but of course our entire society. A liberally educated graduate understands not only how to do something, but also why, and perhaps even more importantly now, whether to do something. As our society becomes more complex and distinctions between right and wrong become blurred, the need for broad-minded, humane, and ethical employees is critically apparent. As liberal educators, part of the mission of schools like Willamette is to foster these qualities in our students, attributes which do not wear out or become obsolete. As individuals and as a society, we must reaffirm our commitment to being liberally educated. I believe our society is at a crossroads when we can choose to pursue liberal education with all of its individual and collective advantages, or we can abandon it by withdrawing our resources and doing nothing except praising it to death with platitudes and cliches about its value. It was that distinguished American philosopher Yogi Berra who said, "When you come to a fork in the road, take it." I'm not sure what he meant, but it's probably good advice. But even better advice is Robert Frost's admonition that when you come to that fork in the road, take the road less traveled. And in this case, take the higher road of liberal education. And as Frost said, it will make all the difference for you and for all of us. Thank you.
Dr. Hudson, thank you very much. We'll have our first question by Andrew Wheeler and our second question by Diane Smiley.
I told him this would be easy. Governor Clinton's economic advisor, Robert Reich, says our higher education system, highlighted by liberal arts, which teaches us how to be maybe more creative, is a second to none, particularly when compared to Japan's. He says that in the global economy, smokestacks moving south, we can be the problem solvers and the idea brokers. In this setting, how will Willamette University respond, and how does it now? And will the CATS bill, and this is just throwing in another one to make it easier, give you students better able to respond?
Yes to the first and no to the second. I think that one of the main reasons why we absolutely must continue to support and encourage our liberal arts colleges is for the reason that that's the one area where indeed we have an advantage in the world in competitiveness. We have a lot of problems that we're all aware of, and I hope on the way to solving in the secondary and elementary areas. But certainly the world has recognized that our educational system at higher level is superior. And I think it's superior in part because we have had a commitment to liberal arts, and I would hope that we'll see that continue and that will indeed give us the competitive edge. I worry about the problems of the students who come into our institutions of higher learning now, and the extent to which we have to either spend time as a remedial institution or correct some of the problems of the lower area. But in general, I think we have an excellent system, and my urging would be to support it and to continue it. The second part of the question about the CATS bill, I think that we're particularly concerned right now to be sure that we don't swing the pendulum too far. Our proclivity, seems to me, most of the time is to see a problem and attack it, and we go so far, and then that solution becomes a problem, and we go back then and go the other direction. That pendulum keeps swinging back and forth. I think the danger is that in recognizing the need to prepare students for careers, for the workforce, that we are in danger of going too far there and not preparing them for life, and not preparing them for the benefits that would be derived from a liberal arts approach. One of my favorite statements that I didn't use in my former remarks was by somebody who said that the worst possible tragedy is to come to age 40, knock on the door of your inner self and find there's nobody home. And I think that's the danger that will happen if we simply allow our system to be focused exclusively on trying to meet the needs for a workforce and the technology advancements rather than liberal arts. Second question.
President Hudson, I'm Diana Smiley of the Education Standing Committee, and I want to follow up the first question, the last half of the first question, and ask you another question regarding the educational reform efforts in Oregon. And this is assuming that a good number of your students at Willamette are Oregon-educated students. And my question is, given the fact that House Bill 3565 has become a reality, and that primary and secondary schools in Oregon are changing and will be changing, what is Willamette doing to prepare for these differently trained, differently educated students, we hope at least, particularly 4 or 5 years down the road? Could you give us some perspective on what your response is?
I think two very different responses. One is we're trying to continue the dialogue about what the implementation of the bill will mean. And so, for example, our faculty are very concerned that there be some input from the colleges about what the students will study, particularly in those last 2 years, what constitutes a level of mastery, and that we hope there'll be more dialogue between the people who are in the education department doing the work on this and various facets of higher education. Secondly, in terms of our preparation, I must say candidly, I think it will have little difference, make little difference on institutions like ours, because frankly we're already getting the very best students from Oregon, and therefore those students who come to us are well prepared. They're able to compete well. They're able to whatever area of the world the students come from, our students in Oregon who are the best students are doing fine. And we would expect that to continue. We are looking more closely at in our education program, because we think there is an opportunity and a need for the training of teachers who will be so crucial and critical to the success of the intent of this bill. And we think we can play a role there, because obviously unless we have able, good teachers, then I think we have little chance of success.
Ted Kay, City Club member. Dr. Hudson, an important flip side to the freedom of thought that you discussed in your remarks is the current furor about political correctness, which is often led by the academic world. Would you please comment on that issue?
Yeah, I have another 45-minute speech that I'd love to comment on. I think that the recognition of political correctness was what fostered addressing this issue in these remarks. That is, I think there's a danger on both sides, and it interests me that it comes. It's hard to make it to divide it politically and say this is coming exclusively from either the left or the right. I think we're seeing an intolerance that comes, and there's probably been more made of political correctness by the press than I think actually exist. That is, I don't see very many examples in higher education institutions in this state, for example, where it has become much of an issue. But I think that we need to be on guard, so to speak, because it has that potential. Because you're wrestling with an issue. I mean, I expected question, try to think of an answer, and wish I'd had a better answer that I thought of on the question of the opposite side of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, because there's a conflict of values there, and if it were easy and it was all on one side, there would be no problem and we could all answer it. But I think we are addressing it by trying to avoid being put in a position where anybody can insist that there is a politically correct way to go, thing to say, and to take action against those who don't do it. I think that I would come down on the side of saying if we have to err, I would err on the side of more freedom of speech and less in trying to establish some sense of conformity and normative side that everybody has agreed to. Yes, sir.
Bruce Spidell, City Club member. The issue is the cost of higher education, particularly private colleges. You look at inflation, efforts that government and companies are doing to cut costs. I'm just, I think the public is appalled at how private education continues to skyrocket in its costs. And it leaves people wondering, is this just because our educators aren't good investors? Or what is the real issue? I mean, why is it so out of skew, at least in a lot of people's opinion, with the rest of the economy?
I think there are exaggerations there. I think there are some obvious ones. The fact that it's so highly labor intensive, and that depending on the period of time that you choose to measure, if you go back to 1970 and trace cost of higher education from 1970, it is not out of line with what has happened to inflation since that time. It's simply that in the 70s, when they had that double-digit inflation, the colleges did not increase the salaries, the cost during that period of time. They then did it to a higher amount in the 80s. So if you looked at it from 1980, there'd be no question. I used to tell students and their parents that cost of a year's education was the same as the cost of a new Chevrolet, that was true since 1940, and if you look at it, it's been in line. I stopped using that when a parent told me that may be true, but we don't buy a new Chevrolet each year for 4 years in a row, and so I don't want to use that anymore. I don't think colleges, and the one place I would take issue with your comment was to particularly point it out on private colleges, because I think because of the market, I think private colleges particularly look for ways to keep cost down. They're in a market-driven economy in that sense, and what we don't see is simply the fact that indeed costs have escalated, but they've escalated in part because of the fact they didn't increase enough in the past. They've escalated in part because of the expectations. We went through a period of time when there was rebellion against in loco parentis, and we said that's not a responsibility of colleges, and now we've gone full circle and people come to college expecting every conceivable service. And so they want all of this counseling, they want all of this career development planning, they want all of the social services that are there, and there's a price tag attached to all of that. So a part of the problem is the degree of expectation of what's expected in colleges. I think that compared to what people are getting from it, it is still, in my judgment, a significant bargain. We cannot afford to cut out the essential part of it, which I think is the direct contact between faculty and students and the academic support areas, all of which are increasing at costs that seem to me to be outlandish. I agree with you, cost of scientific equipment, cost of library books, and yet they're critical and essential parts of it. But if you look at strictly from the economic side, I think it is still a bargain in terms of even economically in the investment in what one is going to get as a return for it. But that is not to say that we are not sensitive to the fact that I think that we work diligently to avoid tuition increases that are higher than can be justified, because we have to appeal to the people who are going to be paying those in order to survive. But I think that it is something that needs to be more attention paid to by all colleges, because a few do indeed give the entire group a bad name at times, because there's some who honestly don't do as we would think would be prudent and wise. Yes, ma'am.
Rusty Goldie, a member of the club. I have a related question. In view of the fact that not only is it expensive to go to a private college, it's getting to be very expensive to go to state colleges also. And I agree with your emphasis on liberal arts education, but often that would mean even more school, and the prices are getting to be astronomical for so many people. What do you think of Governor Clinton's suggestion that college loans are available, but he'd give them a chance to pay back normally in a regular way if he wishes, or by serving 2 years in a sort of a domestic Peace Corps?
I think those are creative suggestions. I would add to it income contingency loans, I think that's a way to consider. I think that linking in some way the return that someone will receive on it by having them pay dependent on what they're receiving through their career is an additional way. I think as long as we recognize that it is in the public interest, that it is in the society's interest for us to have strong educational systems and to have an educated electorate, then the means of providing, whether it's by doing government service, whether it's providing contingency loans, whether it's providing other kinds. There's been suggestions of a similar kind of system on a much more limited basis in terms of the cost as to the Social Security system, whereas trust fund would supply that, which you would agree that 0.5% of income over life would more than cover it. It clearly is a problem. We worry, I suppose it's one of the number one problems we worry about is the degree of indebtedness that students are engaged in trying to put together their education. That used to be true only on the graduate level. But now students are having that not only in the graduate level, but on the undergraduate level. And then if two $40,000 debts marry each other, and you've got a really serious problem. So there has to be some answer. I think as a matter of national policy, we ought to come up with one of those or a similar one. Yes, sir.
Ted Falk, member of the club and one-time student at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I thought that mentioning the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the Fashion Institute of Technology in one paragraph was a bit unfair to the Fashion Institute of Technology, which probably has a goal-orientedness and a vocational commitment that most MIT students would envy. But in light of that, I was wondering what your comments might be on the role of liberal arts education in the role in the lives of students of science and mathematics.
I think that's an area where it is particularly needed and desired as far as the good of society is concerned. That is, I think we have people who are dealing with some of the most important matters of our existence, whether we're talking about health or environment or such, and they need to have the perspective of a good liberal arts education. And so I think one of the things that is needed is the recognition that there is an important part of the education of a scientist that would be liberal arts in nature. There are a lot of things we could do. I have very little to do with medical education, for example, but it bothers me that medical schools have not been willing, in very many cases, to recognize how important it is for future physicians to have the breadth of education that would include more liberal arts. And they begin to, when they put such emphasis on grades, for example, in admitting a student, then to find a student who's going to major in chemistry or biology and go on to med school, whether that student is willing to undertake and risk his career by taking a course in philosophy is questionable, and that's a shame, because we need physicians who are humane. We need humanists. We need scientists who are more humanist. So I would certainly think it makes sense to do it. I don't know of very many tangible steps that are being made to accomplish it, but I would think it's in that direction would be the way to go. And possibly one of the things would be less emphasis on specializations on the undergraduate level too, so that the person isn't typecast as a freshman and then limited to one particular track for their entire career. Yes, sir.
I'm Gus Mattersdorf, I'm a member of the club. I'm sure that Willamette University is pulled at least three ways in trying to choose its student body. One wants to give an education to everybody as a matter of principle. One wants particularly to give an education to the very brightest students wherever they may come from. And one also wants to give an education to those who come from affluent families and can pay the entire tuition bill. How do you make these decisions? Do you have any rules, any policies? How do you go about this?
I think we definitely want to provide access and have made provision. 75% of our students receive financial aid. I laugh when I hear somebody who says, who's looked at our catalog and says, your tuition is X number of dollars, therefore you must simply be serving the wealthy. We are serving, in the best sense of the word, we are serving an academic elite. That is, we do draw the line and say we're going to serve bright students. After making that distinction, then we will seek to make it possible for bright students from whatever their family background and income would be to be able to attend. Last year we provided, through the generosity of a lot of donors, some of whom go back to the 19th century because they made endowment contributions at that time, others much more recently than that. We made provision for expending over $7 million in financial aid to make sure that our commitment to access to students that economic decision will not be the basis upon which a student would be able to choose or not choose. Now, obviously, there are not enough dollars to make that true 100% of the case. We do not have enough funds, for example, to say that we will be able to provide grants for every student for the full amount of the need, but we go a long way towards that. And when you add the grants that are made with the loans and the work opportunity, and that's a package to which almost all the students on aid receive a package including all three of those components, then I think the student who wants that education has the opportunity to do it.
Dr. Hudson, I was struck by your comment about people turning 40 and knocking on the door and not finding anyone home, maybe because I'm getting close to knocking on that door. But I was wondering, in light of that comment, do you see any change in the demographics in terms of the age of students seeking a liberal arts education?
Yes, I think clearly nationally the age of students going to college is increasing, and I think that's healthy. I think what we're going to see more of will be the continuation of the concept of lifelong learning. We're going to, for example, beginning this year, we're establishing an alumni college in the summertime to assist students who might have been students at Willamette 10 years ago or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, but who want to be involved in intellectual stimulation, who want to see what education is about today, who want to be challenged. I think that's what we want to see happen. I was struck this year when a group from Salem came wanting to establish a permanent elder hostel institute on campus so that they could have classes, and there's some minimum age requirements which you wouldn't meet yet, but eventually would, as all of us will. I think that's a wonderful tribute. Probably says that those folks had a liberal arts education somewhere at some time, and it took because they have continued to be alive, to be vital in their thinking, and that's what's needed. So I think we'll see both. We'll see students who are returning to school. We'll see people who recognize the opportunity, and we see that in colleges. Our particular institution is one that is primarily in the undergraduate level serving full-time students, serving students who've just completed high school and gone on, but that's only one model, and I think there are plenty of institutions that are serving the liberal arts and serving a different demographic group.
Jennifer Viviano, City Club member. This is opening a whole new can of worms, and actually a little bit more for higher education in general. But given the societal situation that so many children entering elementary education are not necessarily even prepared for life, let alone education, and are severely debilitated by what's going on in their family, whether it's for loss, dysfunction, drugs, etc. How, in the long run, do you think that that's going to affect higher education?
Well, it clearly affects us because we deal with the result of whatever education occurs before it. It bothers me a little bit, and I don't want to be seen as somebody who blames the secondary school for the caliber of the students we get, and the secondary school blames the elementary school, and the elementary school blames preschool, and preschool blames the parents, and I don't know who the parents blame, but you have the problem. I think it's true that we're all in the situation, and we have to take steps at all those levels to do something to ensure. I mean, one of the steps that I see that is in the right direction has been the ending of the isolation that exists between higher education and the pre-collegiate education. When I was in college, I don't ever remember that there was ever any contact with the high schools, and certainly below high school. Now I find a considerable amount of contact, faculty to faculty, administration to administration, even students to students, because one of the phenomenons, and I wish there had been time to talk about the tremendous growth of volunteerism, the sense of community-mindedness of college students today. And we have hundreds of college students who are serving as tutors in schools, who are serving in some kind of community service project. And I think that's a wonderful step forward. But specifically your question, I think it means that we are all recognizing that it's not just their problem, it's our problem, all of us. And so there are ways in which the colleges must be a part of the solution, and indeed we're certainly part of the problem too, and must be aware of that and seek to do something about it. I think that we have to be careful in the sense that it can open up the same kind of thing I was referring to earlier in saying there's so much expectation, just as there's so many government regulations that I wish I'd thought of that in talking about the increased cost, because there's a price tag attached to all of the regulation. There's a price tag attached to us seeking to be the end-all for all of the ills of society in some way. And I don't think we, as a college, can simply take on as a burden to be solved every societal ill and assume that somehow we have an obligation or a responsibility to solve it. On the other hand, we'd like to be a partner and need to be a partner, I think, in doing it.
President Hudson, thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is drawn to a close here, so we'll have to cut off questions here, but thanks very much for joining us and enlightening us with respect to liberal arts.